Good evening and welcome to the book show. Christmas is obviously coming. Carol,
Yes.
tell us about these.
Well, piles and piles of books are just pouring in the door of the women's bookshop, and I'm sure all the other bookshops as well. Because I'm talking today to Mandy Hager about Singing Home the Whale, that one of the main characters in this novel is an orca, the most gorgeous baby orca. I thought, maybe we'll have a look at some of the animal books. There are cat books, dog books, bird books. One of the most interesting cat books is this Cat Sense by John Bradshaw. Now that's a serious book on cats, full of fascinating information. He's a really learned guy about cats. There's the wonderful Quake cats, of course, from Christchurch. We had Quake dogs, which was so successful, and now Quake cats, the cats that survived the earthquake, and of course the TV show's been on of our beautiful our big blue backyard, and that's the wonderful Janet Hunt. Gorgeous book to go with the TV series. And then, of course, Buller's Birds, fabulous illustrations. This is a smaller, less expensive edition of Buller's Birds, New Zealand birds. And then Professor Penguin. So Lloyd Spencer Davis with his passion for penguins, and so on. More books on birds. There's that's an art book on birds. Wonderful books on dogs and other books on cats. Some of them are gift books. Some of them are serious books talking about the importance of animals in our lives. And there seem to be a lot of gorgeous books on New Zealand birds coming out. A new one due, I think, from Craig Potton later this week. Yeah. But tell us about this gorgeous book that you've got here, Saison.
Saison, yes. Well, this is will be in the bookshops in a few days, but the launch for it was held last evening in Auckland, and of course it's the cookbook from Simon Wright, the chef owner of the French Cafe, and
wonderful.
It's a really wonderful book. The restaurant recently rated as the 4th best in the world, so
really?
The book's got something to live up to.
Yeah, well, it's a gorgeous book, certainly.
It is.
Elspeth, you're a very experienced writer. Tell us a bit about the things you've written in the past, because coming to this novel, this memoir, What Lies Beneath, is something you've come to later in life.
Well, yes, I'm a bit of a fraud, really, because I always said I wouldn't write a memoir for very clear reasons. I was very clear about it, because I felt I was going to be using up my material. Not that I write about my childhood in my novels, but I write about the way you see the world in childhood in my novels, as I think a lot of writers do. They go back to that clarity that children have of the way the world is. They don't understand it, but they see it very clearly. So I didn't want to use up that material. But
right. So you've written a number of novels?
Yes, 8. I've had 8
novels,
published, and a couple that I'm working on at the moment.
Right. And short stories?
A lot of short stories.
And you've written for radio? And
yes, radio was my bread and butter for many years. When I lived in England, I worked for the BBC, not as a staff member, but I seem to have a good relationship with a couple of producers, and they took my plays, so that was lovely. I love radio. I just love it. It's a writer's medium, whereas television is more difficult for writers.
Right, right. So radio plays in particular for the BBC?
Yes. And series. I worked on the Forsyte Chronicle. We did, after the success of the Forsyte Saga, long after, radio, the top people in radio, BBC, decided they would do the whole of the Forsyte Chronicles, which I think I've forgotten how many novels. Boy, they were long, and some of them not very good to read through, but we did a 23 episode, another writer and myself, and that was great fun.
Huge task.
But great fun.
And you also write, I'm aware of your reviews, sometimes as a listener, and I'm sure in Wellington newspapers and so on, because you live in Wellington now.
Yes.
You do quite a lot of reviewing of both theatre and literature.
Yes, mostly I do theatre reviews for the listener, although sadly their policy now seems to be, to do interviews with actors or producers, directors, writers of plays, rather than reviews, because they feel that will benefit the production more, because it'll come out before the play is opened. Whereas often reviews, because the listener comes out every week, and some plays have quite short runs, the reviews come out after the play is finished. But I think it's a shame. I think we need reviewing. So I'm doing a plug here now.
Good. Well,
if Pamela Sterling is listening.
Well, I've enjoyed a lot of your reviews. I'm very aware of them.
Thank
now,
you.
so have you used up too much of your material in writing this, what is a most wonderful memoir, and I think a memoir that has a lot of significance for the many women in New Zealand who have been involved on different sides of the whole abortion issue.
Yes.
And
yes.
the whole adoption issue,
Yes.
and the whole disgrace of being
Illegitimate.
pregnant and out of
Yes.
pregnant out of
Born
wedlock,
out of
being
wedlock,
illegitimate.
yes.
Should this baby be aborted? Should it be, if it is does go full term, should it therefore be adopted, and so on? And you explore those whole
those issues.
issues,
Yes, I
and
think I came to the conclusion that the law, which at first I'd thought was really draconian because it took babies away from their mothers the moment they were born. In some instances, I think the mothers didn't even set eyes on their babies. Unbelievably callous, it seemed to me. But I now understand that the reasoning behind that was actually not callous. It was trying to make the best of what was seen as a either bad or tragic situation, which was that the mother mustn't bond with the child. So the best thing she can do is get mended physically and then get put out into the world as if it never happened. And I think one of the things I learned that really interested me is that female friendship in the 40s, 50s, possibly even longer than that, so long as those adoption laws were in place, female friendship took the place of, I have forgotten that my friend had a baby she shouldn't have had. I've just forgotten. So when I was trying to meet friends of my mother's, there was this, they were lovely women, but there was just this wall that they had to accept that I was who I was, but they weren't going to say a word. Betty was my mother, was their friend, and they were protecting her even after she died.
So there were things they didn't know about,
I know.
or they chose
It
not
actually
to
brought
know
tears
about.
to my eyes because I thought, I'm such a female friendship is what's got me through life.
Absolutely, me too.
Yes. And I just thought that was amazing. That was, they didn't have a moral position about it. It wasn't judgment. It was actually protection.
Yeah. I loved particularly the early sections of this memoir because they read to me like fiction. You recreate what it was like for your mother to be pregnant with you.
Yes.
In those
Well, it
very
began as a
old-fashioned-
novel, so that's why I am a bit of a fraud. So the first third almost is imagined with some real things in there too. But I've imagined it on the basis of what I knew, and I did know quite a lot by the time I came to write it. And even since I've written it, some more information has come to me, which would slightly have changed the direction of some of the writing. But so it is, in some sense, a fictional memoir, although my wonderful publishers won't let me call it that. It has to be a memoir.
You actually met your
My
birth father,
yes.
and he told you the basic facts about
Yes.
what happened with your mother.
He told me that he knew, the families knew each other, his family and her family, that they were New Plymouth families who were acquainted with each other, that he'd known her briefly, sort of en passant, I think, as a teenager. And
They
how
had a
then-
batch together at,
no,
the families had batches at Raglan, is
Well,
that
I
right?
imagined that because I
Ah,
had
right.
to imagine a way in which they would have known each other because New Plymouth's a small town and these were two quite establishment families. It wasn't at all the story I wanted to discover. Of course, I wanted to discover a much more exotic and exciting and colourful story of my origins.
So
In
you
fact-
had romantic notions of what
Yes.
your birth parents were like.
Yes.
So talk about that for
Yes.
a moment.
Oh dear. Well, it's such a giveaway, really. I mean, it's the kind of romantic notions that a child born in the 40s and growing up through the 50s would have had, which is very influenced by the war. So my father was, of course, a Battle of Britain pilot who died saving the country and the world from fascism. And my mother was extremely beautiful, 18, 19-year-old, madly in love with her handsome pilot, and prepared to sleep with him, which, of course she shouldn't have done, because it was the war and he might die. And indeed he did. And
So the reality, as you
Very
tell it in this
different.
wonderful memoir, is rather different
Very
from
different.
the fantasy,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Tell us a bit about Dunedin, because it's also this memoir is a tribute to Dunedin.
It's
in
a
way.
love affair with
A
Dunedin.
love affair with
yes,
Dunedin,
yes.
yeah.
If anyone from Dunedin is listening, if anyone I know, they'll know how I feel about it. I've just been back there for doing a workshop on my stage play, and I don't know what it is. It's a magical place. It's something in the hills. It's the relationship of the hills and the water and the sky and those stone buildings that look as if they've been there forever. It seems a much older city than Auckland, for example, which changes so much you can't really grab a relationship with it. You grab something and then it's gone next time you come.
You captured Dunedin beautifully in here, particularly the old house where you were a child.
Yes, Lauriston. It was a wonderful house. I loved it, and it was a house. Although I didn't have a particularly happy upbringing because of my mother's mental condition, but I had wonderful escape routes. So you know, you didn't feel. I think children now are much more controlled and hemmed in, and they're picked up after school, whereas we wandered.
Was quite a free sort of childhood.
Oh, very wonderful. I mean, we walked to school across paddocks. It was about a mile. We carried our shoes in a bag and put them on when we got to school. And sometimes we didn't get to school. Occasionally we just played hooky. So yeah, very free. And the houses were big enough. At least the house we were brought up in was large, and so full of rooms where you could escape to. You know,
and explore and
yes,
have adventures and there were
yes,
houses
and fill it with imaginary people and
right.
yes, no, but there were wonderful characters too in the Dunedin I grew up in. These were Scottish folk who'd come out here on a religious quest for freedom of expression. So they were strong people with strong wills, but they were very benign. They were very tolerant. I wasn't brought up in a oppressive Presbyterian household at all. There were rules, but they were benignly neglected at times. Mm.
So was writing this memoir difficult? I mean, it's very personal.
Yes, I don't think I intended to publish it. I think I wrote it with that sense of, you know, nobody commissioned me. I was really doing it because it somehow felt it needed to be done, and because it started out as a novel, I thought, well, here's yet another novel that I'll have difficulty getting published. But and then it segued into a memoir.
Into the most wonderful memoir.
Oh, thank you.
And I think, you know, what a wonderful end product. This baby that really, who was an embarrassment to start with, has turned into this wonderful Elspeth Sands.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you,
tonight.
Carol. Thank you very much.
This week I'm reviewing two books. The first, Walking the Waitakere Ranges by Alison Dench and Leanne Perori, published New Holland at $29.99. The rugged Waitakere Ranges Regional Park sprawls from the western Auckland suburbs to the coast around Piha and Whatapu, and its network of bush and coastal trails attracts hundreds of thousands of visitors each year. With the growing popularity of the Hillary Trail, this number is set to rise. The Hillary Trail is a self-guided 4-day 77-kilometre tramp which connects various park tracks and basic backcountry camping grounds. In this new edition, information on the Hillary Trail multi-day walk has been expanded and updated, and new graphics identify walks that are part of the trail. This book was first published in 2001, and with over 12,000 copies sold, Walking the Waitakere Ranges is now in its 4th edition and remains the leading guide to the best walks in the region. The authors have added a new loop walk that uses the freshly constructed Beveridge track near the Arataki Visitor Centre, which is the gateway to the park. Essential detail regarding boardwalks, bridges, surface upgrades, viewing platforms, it's all updated, including information on Kauri dieback. All this ensures the book remains as practical and indispensable as ever, and being small and light, it fits easily into a backpack or a jacket pocket. The introduction covers geology, forests, native birds and pre-European history, as well as the history of the park itself. Safety and security issues are also covered. The balance of the book comprises details of 45 walks, each with a map. All walks are graded with an approximate completion time. So ranging in length from a 20-minute family ramble to the longer, more challenging day walks, the walks have great appeal to families, tourists, backpackers and experienced walkers. The authors are Alison Dench, a skilled researcher, writer, editor, book designer and outdoor enthusiast who has written more than 18 books. Leanne Perori is a freelance outdoor instructor and an experienced tramper who lives in the Waitakere Ranges. Well recommended if you're going in there. Our second book, Hot Pink Spice Saga, subtitled An Indian Culinary Travelogue with Recipes. This is published by Random House at $50. Well-known New Zealand foodies and long-time friends Peter Mathias and Julie Leclerc share a love of travel and a love of food. They both adore India, missing it when not there and always longing to return. So it seemed the perfect idea to combine their talents and expertise and put together a book on India. Thus, Hot Pink Spice Saga was born. Peter first visited India in 2005 while filming a documentary on tea and another one on spices. Subsequently, she now hosts one of her culinary tours in India each year. She sums up India as, quote, a land of colour, noise, laughter, poverty, fabulous food and beautiful clothes. Julie first ventured to India way back in the 80s when just out of her teens, and she says it captured her heartland and imagination. And I quote, "My first visit to India was full of surprises. While I had prepared myself for some culture and did expect to see poverty and perhaps some disarray, I had not anticipated the accompanying charm and curiosity and radiant smiles of the people. Mostly I loved the hospitality, the colours and the landscape, the exhilarating feeling of movement, and of course the wonderfully fragrant and delicious food." With their extensive knowledge, they have put together an Indian culinary travelogue which showcases distinct regional traditions and shares stories of their travels and tales of this exotic country. Peter shares the enticing colour and aromas of India through entertaining stories. The book is loaded with wonderful recipes collected from locals during their travels, all of which have been tested and adapted with a New Zealand home cook in mind, so they're accessible as well as delicious. The book is also jam-packed with beautiful photographs taken by Julie while on the road. It is a fascinating and irresistible combination of food, humour, travel, fun and friendship conveyed through lively text and hundreds of amazing photographs. And it is the most colourful book I've seen in many a long year.
Mandy Hager, it's an absolute delight to have you on the book show because I adored this book of yours, Singing Home the Whale.
Oh, good, I'm glad you did.
But before we get on to that, tell us a little bit about Monton, because you've just come back from the Catherine Mansfield Fellowship in Monton.
I have. It was totally amazing. So many things happened that it's actually hard to hold it all in my head and talk about it. But I was there researching, so I did a really intense amount of research with 15 kilos of books that I carried over with me in Paul Bryan's suitcase, so he had to buy clothes when he got there because there was no room. And so just really immersed myself in that. And then we travelled down right around France to all the places significant to the story, and so I could kind of walk through and get the feel for 12th century France. So it was amazing.
Can I ask you what the book's about?
Sure.
Yeah, it's not a secret?
No, it's not a secret.
This is a new book?
Yeah, it's a new book. It's a book for adults, actually. And so it's about Heloise, of Abelard and Heloise. And nobody's actually written a story from her point of view. So I'm very keen to do that. And actually feel like I've discovered things that really haven't been written and talked about in relation to her much. So it's quite exciting. And I think it's a really well-known story there. So people kind of rolled their eyes a bit in Europe. But I think in some ways coming in as a kind of stroppy, ignorant outsider is possibly quite good. So
you look at it with different eyes.
Yeah. So there's been quite a lot of feminist theory on it lately that's quite interesting to read. And so I'm really excited, actually. I feel like it's in my head now. I've just got a little bit more reading to do, and then that's next year's writing.
Right, so being in Monton was perfect because you were there in France and could actually walk the streets you needed to walk and do the real live research, not just research from books.
Because you can look at 12th century buildings on the internet, but you can't find all those details of actually being there. And we went and listened to Gregorian chanting and just all these things that I know will really add to the flavour.
Now, Gregorian chanting is a lovely note to take us into this book, isn't it? Because one of the extraordinary things about Singing Home the Whale is the singing. I mean, to me, the joy of having a teenage boy who has this marvellous tenor voice, who loves opera, who sings and to whom an orca not only responds but actually harmonises. Tell us about that, because
It's crazy,
it's a
isn't it?
revelation to me that the orca can actually harmonise with the boy.
Yeah, yeah. It's such a, I mean, it's such a weird book, I have to say, and it's usually.
Why is it weird?
Well, it's just I've never read anything like it. It's strange to think that you can put yourself into the head of an orca, but it really just delivered itself to me. So late one night, I think I was watching a documentary about the ocean, and honestly, these paragraphs just sort of started dictating to me in this first-person voice.
And this is the voice of the orca.
This is the voice of the
so
orca.
it's told by Will, the young boy, but it's also told by the
Yes,
orca.
that's right.
And a lot of the orca, all of the orca, the voice is actually very alliterative. There's a lot of
Yeah.
alliteration and quite lyrical, that voice.
Yeah, so the voice, I got this sort of direct stuff coming at me, but it was a very mythic kind of voice, and I wasn't quite sure how I was going to use that. So it took a few months of all these very bizarre coincidences with stuff just kept getting delivered to me until I finally, like a detective, figured out how to tell the story. But then it was a matter of sort of refining that voice, and at the beginning of last year I did a masterclass with Mal Peet when he came out. And he and I just worked on
Fantastic writer for
it.
young
Yeah,
adults,
he was just brilliant. And so we struck on using Old English derived words and just sticking with those. And if I couldn't, so I'd sort of have to look up every single word to see where it came from. And then if it didn't work, you know, try and find an alternative, and then looking for the alliteration as well. So some days I would write like 300 words in 8 hours. But I think by doing that, it's given it a kind of cohesion that really does feel like his voice, and hopefully is like prose poetry. So when I first started writing it, I actually did set it out like poetry just to make sure it felt really different. And I am really pleased with it.
So am I. I mean,
yeah.
it's just, it really works for me
Oh,
to
good.
think here's this baby orca whose mother has been killed, separated from its pod, lonely, needing company, finding the company in Will, and then communicating to Will and to us in his own voice. I mean, it works magically. It really
good.
does.
Actually, my father-in-law said it reminded him of a fairy tale, and I quite like that description of it. It feels a bit like that. But in fact, almost everything in there in terms of the politics around the whale is based on something real. So there was a little orca in Puget Sound in Canada where very similar things happened. It turned up in this tiny fishing and logging community, and it turned into this big national debate about what to do with this orca, and the Native Americans got involved, and so there were some people trying to kill it because they thought it was in its way, and there were other people trying to protect it. So that's what gave me kind of the community heart story
And then
of
you
it.
set that in the Marlborough Sounds
That's
in New
right,
Zealand, in a
yeah.
small fishing village. And Will has gone there in some humiliation and
Yes.
feeling, I mean, he's obviously a very clever young man and with this beautiful voice, but he's gone into a national sort of, you know, I'm a star type
Yeah.
television competition and has ended up, we won't go into the details of it, but he's feeling humiliated, but also because he was beaten up, he's actually quite damaged. He's having
Yeah.
headaches and
Yeah, he's got serious kind of head injury issues going on as a result of that serious beating that he got. And so he's kind of gone into hiding to lick his wounds in a way.
So gone from the city to the
That's
small
right,
fishing village
yeah.
in the Marlborough Sounds.
Yeah, and hating that community. And then hopefully what happens is that community becomes something that he very much relies on and needs to be part of by the end.
Because he makes his connections first with the son of the bully in the town. There's an interesting man. I mean, Dean, his uncle that he lives with, is a lovely character. But there's this other guy who sort of runs the fishing enterprise, and he's a real, you know, a horrible male bully, and he is so believable. But I love the way, and I think teenagers, I mean, this is really a young adult novel that will also have huge appeal to adults as well, but I think teenagers in particular will love the way you deal with the bullying. It's brilliantly done. And this boy gradually builds up connection with the son. I've forgotten his name.
Hunter, yeah.
Hunter's the son of the bully, and also with Pania, the Maori girl. So
Yeah,
that-
I wanted that sense. Just like with the orca, it ends up with a community around it that supports it through its life. That happens to Will. So he starts out feeling completely solitary, and then all these people appear in his life and become his community. So kind of that idea that both of them are in this place of abandonment and damage and needing healing, and that's what they do to each other. And out of that becomes their community and that kind of lifelong bond. It's sort of a love story between them in a way.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's a beautiful love story and it
Oh,
works
good.
wonderfully. I think that it may well be winning awards.
Oh, well,
It-
I just
it
hope
deserves
people
to.
read it and
Yeah.
love it.
Well, I'm sure they will, and I'm sure schools will pick it up because it's just the most warm and loving story that has very real issues in it, and it will make people take great care of orcas.
I hope so. And I hope they actually think a bit larger than that, because to me it's a book about how we treat all other things on the planet, actually. The whale is just a little part of that.
Yes.
But yeah.
Well, it's a wonderful book, so thank you very much for coming and sharing it with us, Mandy.
Oh, well, thank you.
Well, that's our show for this week. In the meantime, until next week, I'll be flat out selling a lot of these wonderful books at the Women's Bookshop.
And I'll be flat out reviewing a lot of them as well, I suspect. And next week, I'm talking to Witi Himaira about his first volume of his autobiography.
And I'll be talking to Peter Wells about his historical book, Journey to a Hanging. So we'll see you next week.